Hi, I'm Bob Bourke and welcome to Mechanic at Large. This week on our show we're going to do something we did a few seasons back. We're just going to show you how to do a complete engine oil change in your car, a grease job, and kind of look it over, do that regular maintenance. Now a lot of you people know how to do this already, but for you first-time car owners, or you ladies that want to learn to do it yourself, I hope you'll join us this week and we'll show you how to go through it. We'll be back after this message. Hi, welcome back. As I said before in this show, we're going to show you how to do an oil change and some maintenance on your car. Now if you've got a car that you bought within the last few years and you looked in your owner's manual, you've probably got some claims that say you can go 6,000, 8,000 miles or 10,000 kilometers between oil changes. I don't like to argue with Lee Iacocca or anybody, but I don't believe in that, folks. And if you live up in this northern part of the world, I think you should be doing that every 2,000 to 3,000 miles at the most. Another thing is your oil filter, and most of your owner's manuals will say you can go without changing that every oil change. But for a couple bucks, I think it's a good investment. Now for those of you who are just looking at this kind of show for the first time and watching here to see how to do this, I want to explain a few things to you about how an engine oils. We're going to go to the chalkboard here, the drawing board, and I'm going to attempt to draw you a schematic of how an engine, how your oil works inside of an engine. We'll move this over here and get a shot of that. I'm going to draw first of all a big V8 engine for you muscle car enthusiasts. We'll put the big V block like that. Down in here we'll put a crankshaft. It's in the bottom of your engine. And we'll put some heads on here and a camshaft about there. And this is basically the configuration of a big V8 engine. We have an oil pan down there. Now what we do in this system, our oil sits down in the oil pan right in here, and we have an oil pump down there that has a screen, and it picks up oil and it has to pump it into the bearings in the crankshaft and the camshaft. It has to go up here to our valve train. We've got rocker arms up here that need oiling, because all these are moving parts that are going up and down about 4,000 times a minute when you're going down the road. So we have an oil pump here in the bottom of our oil pan, and this is where we've got our 4 or 5 quarts of our favorite motor oil. And we have an oil pump here that takes oil and sucks it up to there, into the pump, and then we have a filter hung on the side of the engine. And it'll be hung here like this, or some of them will be hung down, but there'll be an oil filter there, a spin on. And what happens is the oil pump pumps oil inside that filter. That filter takes out all the garbage and junk out of your oil and pumps it back through. Okay, so now we've got clean oil going back into the engine. What we do in a V8 engine like this is we pump the oil up to the camshaft, okay, and the camshaft gets its oil first. So it gets the first clean oil through the filter up to the camshaft. That in turn goes up these push rods, okay, and that drips oil in here or puts oil into our valve train. And that's up in the valve covers, and that's why if you've got leaky valve covers you get oil coming down here, because this oil that comes up here leaks out there. From there we go down to the crankshaft and we'll oil all the main bearings in the bottom end of the car, and that's really the heart of the engine, is the crankshaft. And from there it drips on back down, comes back into the oil pan with all the dirt and garbage that it can pick up, falls back into the oil pan and repeats the cycle. That's the big V8, and it's a conventional oiling system. Let's just get rid of that page and I'll show you something, or I'll try and draw you something about a little 4-cylinder engine. Now we're seeing more and more of these, especially in Japanese and import cars. Little 4-cylinder engines look more like this. We've got a valve cover up there which is also a camshaft cover. And we're going to do this, is kind of a strange drawing, but we've got an oil pan down here, and again we got a crankshaft. Every engine has one. But most of these little cars these days are using an overhead camshaft. Now that removes part of your valve train because these engines don't use push rods. So basically we've got the same thing again. We'll have a filter hung on here. The oil pump picks it up, but this is a one-step operation up here, as we don't have to go through any push rods, we don't have to go both sides, then back down to your crankshaft again. But this is the configuration. On the big V8s you'll find that your oil filter is going to be hidden down underneath the side, whereas on the smaller 4-cylinders it's probably an open view. All right, let's talk about oil filters for a minute. I brought a couple examples with me, and I'm going to show them to you in cutaway. But just so you understand how they work, most filters these days are just a spin-on filter, and that's just a pressed canister like that. And in the top end of it here we have some holes, and I'll show you one of these in a minute. And we've got a rubber gasket around here, and when we screw this onto our car, it filters our engine oil for us. And how it does that is that oil comes in through these holes here, from our oil pump, which I mentioned to you, comes in dirty, and we've got pleated paper in here, and that oil passes in and through that pleated paper, which is very fine stuff, just like screen, passes through that and back out the middle and back out to do our engine oiling, clean oil. All right, now one other important thing is that most American cars have got what's called a bypass filter in them. Now this is for your own protection, and if you follow your owner's manual recommendations or you're too tight to buy an extra filter every change, what happens is that this can all plug off. And if that happens, we have a little bypass valve in the bottom here, and that will let oil get through here and in and save your engine if your filter plugs. Now this is a valuable thing too if you're going through a really bad area, or say a dust storm in Arizona, and you got a lot of dirt in your engine and your filter did plug on you, your engine can still get oil because of the bypass valve. I'll set that aside for a minute and I'll show you what I'm talking about for real. I've got a couple filters here and I cut them apart, and I'm not going to talk about brand makes or anything else today, but I'm going to show you this one here. This filter does not have a bypass in it. Now there's what an oil filter looks like inside. We've got a can here that's basically just a tin can, just like a soup can. We've got a little piece of metal here that holds the rest of this in place, and we've got this pleated paper. And this is what filters your oil. Your oil goes in from here, all right, and it comes out in the middle and back out through this little flange, and here's where your clean oil comes back into your engine to do your oiling. This is the outside sealing gasket, and we have to be very careful about that, and when we get under or put our car up on the hoist, I'll show you where we have to watch for that. This filter here does not have a bypass in it, so if this filter paper plugs, you basically have got a plugged filter. This here is a little heavier duty filter, and here's the little bypass valve I talked to you about. Now that little spring just holds it in place, and here's what the little bypass valve looks like. If I can get it off there. There it is there. That's a little bypass valve. And as I mentioned before, when this filter plugs and the oil is all on the outside here and trying to force its way through, but when this paper is plugged up and it can't get through, it can come up to this little button in here and push against that spring pressure and get oil to your engine. So that's the kind of filter you've probably got in your car with a bypass in it, because most North American manufacturers make them that way for safety. All right? And that's two filters. That's what they look like. One other thing I should mention is you can buy cheap filters and you can buy better filters. And I would follow the recommendations that come with your car and possibly consider buying original equipment, because these two filters are supposedly of equal quality, but you can see a lot of difference in the amount of paper we've got here and a lot of material. And you can't help but think that this is probably going to be a little better filter than this. Now, I mentioned the gasket on the bottom of them. Let's just show you one thing about that. This little seal, when we go under our car, we're going to take a filter off and put another one on. And something we have to be very careful about when we do this, sometimes this gasket will come off and it'll stick to your engine block. And this is the most important thing to watch for when you're changing your oil, is to make sure that this gasket comes off with the one you take off, and then check your new one when it goes on, because if you get two of these rubber gaskets in place, one of them is invariably going to blow out and you're going to lose all your engine oil. Okay? This is the filter we're going to put on today. It's a little one. It's more like it's found on imported cars or the smaller block V8s these days. And it supposedly will do the job of this one, and I wonder about that, but I think maybe that's more reason to change that filter every trip. All right? We're going to put that in our car today. Something else we're going to do is we're going to grease it underneath. And when we talk about doing an oil change, we should be thinking about not just an oil change, but a grease job and a general maintenance checkover. We're going to have a look at that air filter, and we'll show you that later on today, and or later in the show. Show you how to check your air filter, and we'll probably replace that as well. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll put our car up on the hoist, get underneath it, we'll get our hands dirty and show you how to drain it out and how to take that filter off. We'll be back after this message. That should be high enough. We're underneath our car now. We got a little Firebird here. It's a little heavier than I thought, but we got it up there anyway. I think it'll be safe enough. First of all, we're going to drain our oil. There's our oil pan plug right there. And you'll find it always on the bottom of your oil pan, which you'll find always on the bottom of your engine. That's ours in the little Firebird. Look for a round metal thing like this and take the first one ahead, because the next one back is your transmission. That's our oil drain plug. And now, for the first time on this week's edition, is where we get dirty. Okay, that's a metric one, 15/16. Try a socket first, an open-end wrench second. If that fails, go to the crescent wrench and then eventually the vice grip. I hope you won't have to do that. We're just going to loosen that off. We've got a drain pan ready here. One thing I want to remind you, it's best to do this when your engine is hot, but it's also quite a bit more dangerous. You can burn yourself with this oil. So I'm going to get my can ready already here. Put my wrench in my pocket. Get a rag ready. We'll set our filter out of the way, and we're going to drain this engine oil. Now I got a drain pan I'm going to lift up there just to start. This is going to come out of here pretty fast and pretty black and pretty hot, so try not to drop your plug in the pan. There we go. Look at that terrible looking stuff. I'm going to set that plug aside for a minute. I'm going to set this pan down. And we'll just let that drain. You can see that engine oil is dirty, and that means it's doing its job because it's picking up all that carbon and sludge out of your engine and taking it away to the dump for you right now. We're going to go up and get that filter off. While we let that drain, I'll just move that over there. The filter in this engine is located up here in the side. You're not going to be able to see much of this, but I can see it pretty well. And on some of your engines, as I mentioned, it may be down here in this area, right in here or here. But this one's just a little ways up on the side, so I'm going to have to take a wrench up in there and get that off. And I've got a little filter wrench here. Be sure you buy the right size. There's no standard size anymore. A few years back, you could buy one that was about 3.5 inches that fit just everything. But now this car, with the filter I showed you before, uses this little wrench, and you've got to be sure to get the right one. So the best thing you can do if you're going to get into changing your own oil is go down to the shop where you want to buy, go down to the shop where you want to buy your oil filters and get the filter, and then find the right size of wrench for it. I'm going to snap this on up here. Oh, these always confuse me. They're easy to get backwards. Put that up there, and I'm going to reach up in there and take that filter off, I think. Hope I got this figured there. I got that figured out right. Now, that's not on too tight. Just going to undo that. Now, when we undo that, we're going to get a little bit of an oil bath here. So I'm going to get my wrench on one side and just put that away for a second. And I'm going to move my drain pan over. And if we're lucky, we'll be able to catch both leaks at the same time. I'm just going to spin that off, and here comes the oil. Yeah. See, this is where we get dirty, but it all washes off, folks. It all washes off. Ladies, you're going out for the evening, you'll be able to wash it off and put your cocktail dress on, no problem. It's just oil. There's the little filter. I'm going to take it right down and drop it right in with the dirty oil. Now you'll notice up here when we're draining, and I don't know why car manufacturers do this, but they always put an exhaust pipe underneath where your oil filter drains. And they do that so that when you start your car, this gets hot and it stinks for about 5 minutes. That's to remind you what a good job you did of changing your own oil. We'll put that filter on. I mentioned to you before, and I want to just hold this filter up here and show you something if we can see this, but I mentioned to you before this gasket. Okay, that's the one we want to go up and check and make sure the old gasket isn't stuck up in place. The second thing we want to do with that is we want to put a little lubrication on here. And we'll just take some of that used dirty oil and rub it around that ring. All right, just like that. We'll rub it around that ring, and that's going to make that thing seal tight, and we'll be able to tighten it up, and yet it won't get stuck on us. We'll be able to take it off next time. I'm going to reach up in there. Be careful when you do this because there's often dirt and contamination up around this area, so try and keep this as clean as possible. Reach up cleanly. Hold your mouth right. Don't get your contact lenses underneath the dripping oil, and screw that on. Now, the next rule, and something very important right here, is we never put a wrench on an oil filter when we're putting it on. We tighten it by hand. So wipe your hand off good, put it up in there, and tighten that filter about as tight as you can get by hand. And if you're less than 100 pounds and haven't had your Wheaties, put 2 hands on it and tighten it about as tight as you can get it with your hand, all right? And that's all you need. Now one thing, we're going to put this car down after we're done naturally. We're not going to leave it up here for the rest of its life. We're going to put this down, and when we dump our oil back into this car, we'll start the engine. And at that time, we want to check here and see if we've got any leaks, okay? Now and again, you'll get a filter that'll leak right from the factory, so we're going to check this area for leaks. I'm going to wipe this off so it doesn't smell so bad. I'll wipe off around the filter there, and then if it drips or leaks when we start it up, we can see. Good enough. Now, our drain plug. So be careful with our oil here. Let's put that drain plug back in. Now that's a magnetic drain plug. You can see there's a little knob on the end of it, and you'll find that sometimes they're magnetic, and there's a little gasket on here. Just take a look and inspect it. It all looks good. We'll put that back in there, tighten it up. Now something to remember here, you don't have to kill this thing, you don't have to try to twist it off, and you don't have to strip it out of your oil pan. You've got to have it good and snug, but there's no reason to break things or to strip it. So we'll just get that back in tight. A little millimetric wrench here. Fortunate enough we can still use a socket on this one. Don't need the vice grips. Okay, just get that good and snug. And again, wipe it off because you can visually inspect that by looking underneath to make sure you got no leaks. Now while we're down here, I just want to point out one thing. This is a good time to check underneath your car and see if you've got some other leaks. And as you can see from this one, we got a lot of oil in this area. And to identify where it's coming from, we want to look at the color of it. And this oil's here, you won't be able to see this, but I can identify this as being red oil. So that means it's out of our automatic transmission. And what we've got, if we've got a leak at the front end, between the transmission and engine, probably means we have a seal leaking at the front of our torque converter. Now that's something we won't be able to do on today's show, but down the road we'll be doing a little bit of work on automatic transmissions, and we'll show you where that is anyway. But that's automatic transmission oil, and that should be looked into. Now I'm going to move our drain pan out of the way here, and we're going to go up front and grease this thing. And we'll show you how to go about doing that, and that should be done every time you change your oil. And you could get away with doing that every other time, but it's a good idea when you're doing these maintenance things to do the whole routine and do it once. I'll move our oil out of the way. And we're going to come back down the front end here now. Now what we're going to do, I've got a grease gun here. Let me get some wrenches out of my pocket. I've got a grease gun here, and we're going to grease the front end of this car. Now on some of the newest models of cars, you don't have any grease nipples anymore. They're supposedly sealed for life, or they last forever. And I kind of prefer these old ones you can grease because it gives you a chance to put hands on and inspect it. This here, right, this little piece you're looking at right here is a tie rod end, and basically your life depends on that. So it's kind of nice to be able to grab a hold of it now and again and just give it a yank. Now I've got a grease gun here. We'll just snap it on there, and what we want to do when we're greasing is basically pump the handle and grease that joint until we see grease appearing. Now, I've got it coming out the back side of this joint right now, and as soon as the grease starts to come out of there, we've got enough. There's one here on the bottom side, and you've got to look for these things and get in the habit of finding them all because you don't want to miss one. That one's good. I'm going to move across here. This is all your steering gear, folks, your mechanism. One right there. And if you watch, I think, there, you can see the grease pop out of that, and that means that's greased. Over one more. Some of these are a little bit difficult to get on, especially if you're laying in your driveway in the winter time. There we go. That one's greased. Now one thing I want to point out, I'm skipping one right here because I can't do it right now. I'm going to do it when we put the car down. And on GM cars, it's right up on top above the wheel here. And as I say, don't forget that one because you want to get in the habit of greasing everything when you do grease. So it's right up above the wheel. I'm going to do that when we put the car down off the hoist. Let's keep moving across. We got that one, we got that one. Over to this side. And up in here. I don't know why they can't make these things all point down. But of course, they might get knocked off on the road, I guess, if they did. There we go. That's that one. We're greased. One more there. Now sometimes you'll find a grease nipple that won't take grease. And if that's the case, what you've got to do is unscrew that nipple and change it. Because that means it's damaged and it's plugged. And if your gun won't pump it into it, you should basically unscrew that grease nipple and go down to the automotive store and buy a new one and change it because you're going to get a dry joint there. One more there. And I'm going to go across here, and you may not be able to see this one quite so well. But we're going to get it because we're doing the complete job. I've got one more down in here. right there. Now, as I said, I left two of them that I couldn't do. I'm just going to put this gun out of the way for a minute. Okay, now we've greased our car. Now, while we're down here, there's another couple things we can look at just to check general condition. I've got another little leak I noticed up in here when I went by. And most things on a car you can identify by taste or by looks. Okay, this is obviously, and again you won't be able to see it, but it's green. And that tells me that it's antifreeze. So from somewhere in this car we've got an antifreeze leak. Okay, this stuff back there was red, transmission fluid, green is antifreeze. The other way, if you're not a fraidy cat, to check if you suspect you have an antifreeze leak is to taste it. Okay, and it's not the most pleasant thing, but antifreeze is sweet, and oily is just plain oily, or oil is just plain oily. One other thing, while we're down here, these GM cars have got a tendency, sometimes you're going over small bumps, to want to make a kind of a groaning noise, and they'll kind of go, and if they do, that's the problem, is right here. And I'm going to show you what to do with that. I'm just going to step out here for a second and grab a can of oil. And this is a commercial oil you'll all recognize, but the way to cure that little groaning is to just take and saturate that area in there. Okay, and those rubber areas, because when the rubbers get dried up from road salt and so on, they'll make a little groaning noise. Another one over here. I've got to be careful where I shoot here. I don't want to blind the cameraman or blind the camera. Just saturate them with oil, and that'll usually stop that. Also in here, you got some rubbers in your shocks, and you can saturate them with these light types of oils because they won't deteriorate the rubber. Okay, that's about all I can tell you down here. We got our plug back in for sure. We're going to check that when we go up top. We got our filter on, hand tight. We wiped everything down. We've checked for leaks, and we lubricated these rubber areas. So we're going to bring the car down and put our oil back in and check for leaks. We'll be right back after this message. Hi, welcome back. I got that car down. My back is really tired. We're getting our last quart of oil into it. Most of these engines take about 4 quarts. Some of the bigger ones take 5. Now, I mentioned our air filter. We'll just check it quickly. We haven't got much time left. That's right inside there. Take it off, and you can look through a trouble light, but there's no need to look at that one, folks. That's a disgrace. Don't ever let yours get like that. Okay? If it's like that, chuck it out. We got a new one here somewhere. Wipe out the inside of your canister, clean it all up, put that in, and make sure you got that snug down good. Remember also, folks, to check, start your car up after you've done this. You've got your oil in. Start it up and look underneath for leaks around your filter or around your drain plug. Thanks for joining us this week on Mechanic at Large. We'll see you next week.